disability progressed, I was no longer able to do that profession. And so I had to decide kind of what was next for me and what was the next step. How could I continue to have purpose and meaning in my life? And what would that look like given the new nature of my abilities? And so I kind of looked at my desire to help others, but also my love of travel. And so I decided to combine those two passions, and I became a wheelchair accessible travel blogger.
Is going to need to invest in making the world more accessible.
Absolutely. And I think even in America, we have a long way to go to make that happen. I mean, even talking about the workforce, right? That I think we mentioned in our, pre-podcast discussion that they have a very one-sided view of how they define work. And, unless you're working so many hours a week and are guaranteed a specific hourly wage or a salaried rate, then anything outside of that, they don't necessarily have this have a structure in place to recognize that or accommodate that. Because as a travel blogger, I don't get paid a set wage each week. I don't get a set income, and that's very much dependent on a lot of different factors. So a lot of that they don't know what to do with. They don't know, am I working? Am I, is this a hobby? How do we define this? How do we move forward with this? What does that look like? But in many ways, this non-traditional job is exactly what fits my needs and my abilities. Because it allows me to be more flexible. So, I think if we change how we define work and how we can look at that, and we don't just think of a traditional job, I think people with disabilities should be much more successful.
I think what needs to be considered is, when people have inaccessible things like stairs leading to a restaurant, it's not necessarily, of course, it's inaccessible to people with disabilities that need to use a ramp or what have you, but it's also inaccessible to a whole host of other people. Maybe maybe they have a stroller, or maybe they just don't have the capability at that moment to get up the stairs for whatever reason.
Right.
Yeah, and what I found, I mean, there's always that fear, right? And what that does is that creates travel anxiety. And it's hard because it's based in reality, right? There are some irrational fears that we have, about flying. For example, what if the plane crashes or whatever? But when you're talking about accessibility, those are very much reality-based fears. What if I show up to a hotel and the room isn't accessible? What do I do? What if I go to a restaurant and have to use the bathroom and they don't have an accessible restroom? What do I do? How do I, these basic needs that I think sometimes people take for granted, of being able to use a restroom when you're out and about traveling and sightseeing and not having to worry about whether there will be one available, right? And so I was just discussing this with my readers yesterday, of how that actually keeps them from traveling and having a quality of life